Hi, this is Masai from Olympian High School. We've been reading chapter 35 with my classes and Mr. Hammond's classes. We've been looking at the Great Depression. And I want to help you guys break down this section in the book on economic experimentation. Again, this PowerPoint slides are sorely lacking here. So we have looked at this slide before and talked about some of the strategies that failed. And this is the best slide that corresponds with this part of the reading. So it tells you that in classic economic thought, capitalism was supposed to function best when left to its own devices, when the government doesn't tamper with it through intervention or programs. And so initially, the response to the Great Depression was either to do nothing and hope that the capitalist system would resolve itself, or to take deflationary measures, balance budgets, because inflation is related to consumer spending. You don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty of economics. You guys will learn about that in 12th grade. But you do need to have a basic understanding of supply and demand and supply and demand. In any case, the first few actions of governments was not very helpful. And eventually, people had to re-examine the classical approach to capitalism. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a famous economist named John Maynard Keynes, who his ideas didn't really become popular until later, until after World War I. He publishes his seminal work, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, in 1936. And I'm going to talk about his ideas now because his ideas challenge the previous ideas on the economy. But the ideas encapsulated in his work were sort of thought of by FDR and Congress and applied even before. So they were sort of anticipated by Congress. So John Maynard Keynes is an economist that said the problem with the economy wasn't that there was too much supply. So let me take a minute to talk about supply and demand, and I encourage you to Google this on your own. So the price of something is determined by how much you have of it, that's called the supply, and how much people want it, which is the demand. So if you have too high of a supply, there's too many diamonds, then diamonds become very cheap, for example. It's a very simple example, but obviously for our case, diamonds are usually rare, so their price is very high. Okay, so this is the general thinking that was happening at the time, and people were saying, oh, there's too much agricultural production, so that's why prices are so low. We need to decrease the supply. And what John Maynard Keynes said is it's not so much a problem of supply, it's a problem of demand. People aren't purchasing, demand is how much people want something. So it's not that they didn't want it, they didn't have the money to spend on it because they didn't have jobs. So what he suggested was that the government intervene, the government get involved by putting money into people's hands, by doing all kinds of things, including giving people jobs through government-run agencies, like the CCC, people building parks, national parks, and encouraging investment, lowering interest rates to get businesses to invest in the economy and give people jobs. So the idea was, let's give people jobs so that they have the money to spend, and that will help reinvigorate the economy. Okay, pardon me. So I mentioned that Herbert Hoover was the president during the Great Depression, and when he ran for election again in 1932, he lost against FDR. That's the name of one of our most famous presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he's most often associated with the New Deal. So Congress and FDR passed a series of programs meant to stimulate the economy and care for the welfare of people. This is really important when you go on to AP US History in 11th grade, because this changes the fundamental nature of America's government. We start to change how we perceive what the government should and shouldn't do. We start to feel like the government should intervene in the economy, whereas before, again, it was more laissez-faire sort of approach. Ultimately, all that the New Deal did, so some of the things that we love come even today and have today, like Social Security, caring for the elderly, minimum wage, the ability for unions to exist, the FDIC, which ensures your deposits at banks. All of those things were meant to stimulate the economy and make it recover, reform the banks, reform things so that, in the future you wouldn't have Great Depressions again. All of that helped the economy somewhat, but what helped the economy the most was when we get into World War II and there's all this military spending on weapons, and that's really going to stimulate our economy. So you can read more in your book about Keynesian ideas, saying that governments should run a deficit if they have to, if that's what they need to do to stimulate the economy. So not focusing so much on balanced budgets. And then this tells you about the New Deal. When you get into AP US history, they might make distinctions between the first New Deal and the second New Deal and all these different things of the New Deal. For our class, you just need to remember that this is a turning point for the way the US government works. After this point, they're going to be much more involved in the economy and in social welfare programs and reforms. And that's what you need to know about economic experimentation related to the Great Depression.